Who here likes free Wi-Fi? Hands up. Yeah, that's reasonable. We all like something free. Interestingly, though, I don't think that love of free Wi-Fi is necessarily translated through to this morning and this afternoon. Earlier, before we came in here, my colleagues and I came in. We set up a Wi-Fi access point. We built a landing page to look like TEDx, and we asked you to enter in email addresses and enter in a password. We've done this with malicious intent. If anyone recognises their email address up there, for the next 15 minutes or so, you're my victim. Now, if you look at a couple of the email addresses at the bottom, I think people were perhaps onto our little trick. And in the circumstance of what we've done this morning, perhaps that's actually a good thing. My name's Sven and I'm here to talk to you today about the modern cyber threat, the modern cyber problem. I think it's worth exploring this because as we enter into, as we are now in the digital age, and as we step forward into a future with the future blueprint, we use technology almost pervasively throughout our lives. And I think we need to understand the risk that it poses, and for every advantage that we take of technology, perhaps there's something or someone out there using it to their advantage as well. But what is a cyber threat? What is hacking? I won't ask for any contributions from the audience. I'd just like to give, I guess, my own interpretation of what this is. Broadly set, hacking is the manipulation of technology or process or both in order to deliver effect that wasn't intended by the originator of that technology or process, and with a malicious intent. It can come in many forms. It can come in a simplistic form, such as a social engineering attack that we engineered this morning against you guys. It can be brutal and chunky, such as a brute force attempt against your password, trying to crack your password. Or it can be a touch more elegant and sophisticated, such as placing a little bit of malicious software on your laptop so that when you enter your banking credentials, it captures it as you're entering the keystrokes and sends it off to a central server so someone can log into your bank account and steal your money. Now, I think we're a little misled by the media when it comes to what the cyber threat is. And this is the crux of my talk this morning. And I think we're misled because we see photos like this. We see images where the focus is 100% on the code, on the technology, on the ones and zeros. And sometimes we see things like this, where it's definitely the code that's coming to attack us. But it's not. And that's what I'd like to cover this morning, this afternoon. But first, I haven't always worn a suit. A little bit about me. I haven't always worn suits. I haven't always worn pink shirts. I haven't always been a normal person. For the greater part of my adult life, I spent in the military, specifically the army, and serving in special forces regiments. Now, when I would tell people this, they'd have images, again, perhaps a little misleading. They'd see things like this in their head. Sexy, Brad Pitt, jumping out of helicopters. I didn't do that. I did things more like this. And no, I'm not talking about the very good-looking man holding the radio handset. I'm talking about the short, dumpy man who you can't see carrying the radio on his back. I did a little bit of that. I did a lot of looking at computer networks, staring at satellite networks, and otherwise looking at the ones and zeros running around the ether. Lots of diagrams like that. Very boring stuff. I spent pretty much all of my adult life using technology to make sure that people could communicate. But I guess being in the army, I also spent a lot of my adult life making sure, or using technology to make sure that other people couldn't communicate. And so whilst it's not the sexy Hollywood image of what special operations does, I think it's what lends me the credibility to stand up in front of you this afternoon and talk about what constitutes the modern cyber threat. But before we do, I just want to tell a little story, do a little history lesson. It's 1960. A gentleman named Colonel John Boyd, a veteran US Air Force fighter pilot who served in the Korean War, was working on a program in the Pentagon to develop a new fighter jet. And he developed a theory of aircraft maneuverability called the energy maneuverability theory. Now, I'm about as far from an aeronautical engineer as you can get, so I'm going to be very high level on this, and Colonel John Boyd, forgive me. The theory postulated that the thrust-to-weight ratio and the wing orientation of a fighter jet was what lent it is what gave it an advantage in air combat manoeuvres, not necessarily its speed or its ability to dive. I'll leave that there. But anyway, as he developed this theory and thrown a lot of numbers through a lot of very big computers sitting under the Pentagon, he was saying, yes, this is exactly this is what describes air superiority. This is what describes a better fighter jet. As he applied this theory to his combat experience from the Korean War, he flew F-86 Sabres. He couldn't really understand what the data of his theory and then what the results and kill ratio between the American aircraft and the North Korean, Soviet, and Chinese aircraft was telling him. The American aircraft significantly outperformed, or the Americans significantly outperformed their communist counterparts. The F-86 and previous iterations of American aircraft shot down a lot more MiG-15s. Now, according to Boyd's EM theory, this shouldn't make sense. The MiG was, in fact, faster. It was significantly more manoeuvrable. Its wing orientation was superior to previous iterations. The Sabre had, by this stage of the war, caught up with the MiG's design. But the numbers were skewed. He didn't understand. Why was this? And it wasn't until he was looking at a picture, possibly not dissimilar to what I've got behind me and what you're looking at, and he noticed something really imperceptible, a detail that would otherwise be missed. And if you can see it, it's that the rear of the canopy of the MiG-15 is slightly more armoured, and that the perspex of the canopy itself was ever so slightly thicker. The designers of the MiG had opted for higher protection and a high degree of safety for the pilot. This was his eureka moment. John Boyd knew, as a fighter pilot himself, the process he went through during air combat manoeuvres and the advantage that 180, 270 degrees of visibility provided him. And that imperceptibly small piece of armour to his rear during air combat manoeuvres as you're flipping planes over and looking all around you was significant. And at that point he realised there's two factors. Yes, it's the aircraft, but it's also the speed at which you make decisions, particularly in an adversarial contest, and particularly in a contest done at significant speed, that affords you victory. He developed a second theory, clever fella. He developed a theory called the OODA loop, and that is observation, orientation, decision, and action. And he postulated that all intelligent beings go through this loop as we make decisions, as we react to the world around us, and as we choose to engage with the problem in front of us. He said it's true of individuals, and he says it's true of organisations as well. But what does that have to do with the modern cyber problem? What does human decision cycles have to do with being hacked? Well, remember at the start I said that it's not the focus is on technology, and I believe this to be a little misleading. It's misleading because cyber threats are human. It's not the ones and zeros that attack you. It's not the piece of malware that sits on your laptop, and it's not the phishing email. Somewhere, someone has made a decision to use technology to attack you, to take something from you, to take malicious action using technology, using process, and act against you. Now, that could be a confronting thought, certainly is for me. And I've spent a long time in the army, a long time in the military, knowing that I have an enemy somewhere. So for those of us in everyday life, the thought that somewhere someone is trying to act against us, I agree, can be confronting. But as we step into, not just step into, as we now live in a digital age and everything we do is increasingly leveraged and reliant upon technology, I think it's interesting to note and important to note that for every advantage technology brings us, there's a darker side to it, and that someone can use this technology to act against us. So because the cyber threat is human, it's complex and it's adaptive. It's complex because it leverages technology, and it's adaptive because it's human. It has its own decision cycle. So at the start of every cyber attack, there has been a human who has gone through their own OODA loop, and their action is to attack you. Now, coming from the military, we've had a bit of experience, I've had a bit of experience in engaging with a complex and adaptive enemy. Spent a little bit of my life in Afghanistan, probably too long, and the enemy we fought over there was complex and adaptive. And we learnt some very tough lessons, but we learnt some quick lessons about how to deal with this. And it was about defeating their OODA loop, getting inside the enemy's OODA loop. Because at the moment, I think, in the world today, we are all very much the adversary, the cyber threat, is inside our OODA loop. They're able to observe, orient, decide, and act against us with a lot more speed than we are. And certainly in Afghanistan, it led us to changing our methodology of operations. We moved to intelligence-led operations rather than coming up with a plan, allocating resources, and monolithically following that plan. And this was well, not quite a revolution, but certainly an evolution in the way we conducted our business. And really, all that meant was we needed to speed up our decision-making. We needed our decision cycle to be faster than the enemy's. We needed to be able to disrupt his decision cycle. I think we've all been in situations where, be it an adversarial context or otherwise, where we feel reactive. We feel like we're on the back foot. We feel like decisions are being made around us and we can only react to it. Our opponent's OODA loop is faster than ours. And I think we've been in situations where we feel we're on the front foot. We're making decisions faster than the adversary. And this is the crux of Boyd's theory, is those able to observe, orient, decide and act faster than the other will win the engagement. I know you're thinking, Sven, what does this have to do with me? What does it have to do with my place in the world and how I engage with technology? Well, I'd like to offer, I guess, a little vignette, a little analogy of how I think we can all disrupt the adversary's OODA loop. I'd like you to think about passwords. Now, hopefully, those people that actually logged into our little trick this morning didn't actually enter your real password that you've used elsewhere. But I tell you what, some people probably did. Now, what you see on the board behind me is examples of bad passwords. Now, we know a lot about passwords these days because every major breach that occurs, every huge dump of credentials on the internet is available for researchers such as us and also bad guy researchers. We now know a lot about how humans construct passwords. When you use bad passwords like this, you leave yourself vulnerable. Why is that? You say, Sven, but there's clever people who write clever technology and clever mathematicians who encrypt my password. And that's true. Typically, as you enter a password into any legitimate site, it goes through what's called a hash algorithm. And that means the string of text or numbers that you've put in results in an enormous string that's completely irreversible. So you can't actually reverse engineer that hash back into the password you entered. But because we know so much about the way humans construct passwords, because we and the adversary has advantage to high compute, we can somewhat cheat that process. We can use our knowledge of the way humans construct passwords to defeat that hash and essentially recreate it and therefore learn the passwords because they're so simple. So when you all use passwords in the internet, if you use passwords that are short, if you use passwords that are not random, and if you use passwords that are not complex, you're giving the adversary the advantage. You're speeding up his decision cycle by being lazy. His ability to observe simple password use, orient himself to your situation and your context, make a decision to act against that password, and then actually enact that cracking or enact that guessing process is made very simply. This is what I'd like to leave you with today. That the pervasiveness of technology, today, tomorrow, and the day after that, means that we all have a role to play in disrupting the modern cyber threat, the modern cyber problem. And it can be as simple as using long, complex, and random passwords. Thank you very much.